Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to host today the webinar on the impact of COVID on the cultural and creative industry in the Mediterranean, and we will try to assess the role for the digitalization. So let me start with a quick introduction on why this topic is important for the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association. First of all, as economists, we are trying now to work further on the sectors which will have potential value creation and job generation for the Mediterranean. So we have launched a new research initiative which is specifically focusing on the channels of value and job creation in this specific sector, the creative and cultural industry, for the Mediterranean and for Africa. Of course, what also we are trying to understand is the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, and eventually to be able to propose some recommendations for economic policy to enhance the capacity of this sector to become an engine for growth and for innovation, also powered by the digitalization, and eventually to transform these business models toward more sustainability and more inclusion. So basically, if we look at how the sector, the cultural creative industry developed over the years, we can see that in Europe, in United States and in other parts of the world, it has been really an engine for employment and also growth. I would also like to share with you the first results of a survey that we have launched last year, actually before COVID-19, we started this, on the level of preparedness of small and medium-sized enterprises to the digitalization wave. And for us, digitalization has been a process that has been developed since many years already, and we wanted to assess what is the level of preparedness of the SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, into this new transition, which is a digital transition. Also, I would like to make an announcement that EMEA and its partners, and I'm very happy also to have one of our partners, BUSINESSMED, today with us, represented in the panel today. We are working together on a new project, brand new. In fact, we launched it a few months ago in the middle of the COVID. It's called Crowdfunding, which is co-funded by the European Union. And this project mainly aims at uncovering the untapped potential for the CCI to enhance economic growth, create decent jobs, and promote social inclusion in the Mediterranean by, in fact, exploring the strengths and weaknesses of the sector and providing training and subgranting for projects led by women and youth in the southern Mediterranean region. So my dog is also wanting to say something. In Europe, the creative and cultural sector is a driver for economic growth, as I mentioned, and also of innovation and social inclusion. But then the COVID has created serious problems for this sector, also for Europe. And the policy mitigation responses also have been threatening very much the development of the sector. And we can see that because of the lockdown, the social distancing and so on, many detrimental effects have been happening not only in Europe, but also worldwide. And we could see all the surveys that have mentioned those implications. So but then we have to see the aspects from different perspectives. On one hand, the impact on employment has been quite detrimental, particularly for women and for youth. And obviously, some of the sectors which have been very much very much fragile, and they continue to be even further fragile during the pandemic, is this sector, which, if you see it, a lot of it's informal in the Mediterranean region. But also, some of the policy answers which have been put forward also may not see their consequences, clearly put in place over the years. Also, on the other hand, the acceleration of the digital transition, which we've seen over the last months, has also provided large opportunities to all the sectors, including this cultural and creative industry. So with these elements to guide our discussion, I'm very happy and very honored to welcome this lineup of distinguished panelists today, who each one of them is working from a different perspective on this sector and also on the digitalization. And also would like to welcome all the participants who have registered in this webinar. Let me just also mention that the webinar content and discussions are public and are live broadcasted on Facebook. So whoever is not able to get the registration, they can also follow the discussions of this webinar on the Facebook. Also, the EMEA team will later on publish the report of the discussions, and then they will make the recording of this webinar available on our website. So just for housekeeping, all the participants, if you have questions and answers, please use the Q&A chat. For the panelists, please use the chat box. This is where you can put your questions. Let us start. So this webinar aims at exploring the impacts of COVID-19, which we are still living in it. We are still in some partial forms of lockdown. Here we are, for example, in Spain, and some of us are already, still on a lockdown. So this impact of COVID-19 of the sector of the cultural and creative industry in the Mediterranean, and also to discuss the role of digitalization as a vector of resilience during and post the health crisis that we are living in. We will start with, as I mentioned, some preliminary results of the survey that we have developed. So I would like to give the floor first for the next 10 minutes to my colleague Yagane, who is a researcher at EMEA, to share with us those preliminary results, which in fact it's a research in progress. So then please, Yagane, the floor is yours, and share your screen for the slides.
Very much, Reem. I'm honored to be here and to present this study and be a part of this webinar, which is very interesting and timely. Okay, so let's move on with the introduction. So as we all know, in every sector, including cultural and creative sector, digital platforms have drastically changed the way we work, the way we consume. And there is this platform economy literature that is developed on this topic. And the main question of this webinar is how digitalization can mitigate the negative impact of COVID-19 in the Mediterranean. But another questions and things that we need to tackle that are the necessary conditions for digitalization. So there are 2 points I think we should always have them in mind, that whether the infrastructure is sufficient, whether we have internet coverage in rural areas or not, for instance, and whether people are ready to adopt digitalization and digital tools, both in terms of their educational level and the capacity of usage of these digital goods, and also their capacity or their financial capacity to provide themselves with digital tools. For instance, buying a computer or a smartphone, or being able to pay bills, to have internet access, and so on. So I think these are important things to points to rise. Regarding the nexus between digitalization and CCI, I believe that the relationship is two-way. There's this two-way relationship that CCI enhanced demand for digitalization, as it is mentioned in the UNESCO report that digital cultural goods are the biggest revenue source for the digital economy. And also the other way around is true, that digitalization enhances demand for CCI, because digital tools provide access to markets that otherwise impossible. So for the CCI contents, it can be diffused into a very larger customer and in bigger markets. But there is this negative side on, or this negative impact of digitalization on CCI, which is the IPR issues and digital piracy. Since digital tools, it makes it extremely easy to copy and disseminate cultural and creative goods and actually creations online at very large scale. It's a big problem. So piracy issues rises with digitalization as well. So as you mentioned, Rim, we live in this COVID, we're in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis, but it hit the hardest the venue-based sectors. And in venue-based sectors in the CCIs, we have lots of them. We have in museums, performing arts, live music, festivals, cinema, and so on. And because of these social distancing measures, these sectors are hit pretty hard. And this negative impact has, I mean, people expect it for it to last long for a number of reasons. Firstly, because the decline in national and international tourism level is expected to last long. Experts predict an L-shaped recovery for the tourism sector. And there are many CCI activities that are related to tourism and rely on tourism. There's this decline in purchasing power. There's this decline in public and private funding for arts and culture. So all these elements unfortunately contribute to the shock to last long. And those active in the sector will suffer unless they have a digital platform. So digitalization is actually viewed as a tool to overcome this problem and be able to remain active even if we are in the middle of the crisis. So COVID-19 is a threat for jobs. When we look at the probability of job loss due to COVID-19 in developed countries, US, UK, and Germany, it rises as high as 35% for UK for temporary jobs. So that's very, I think it's enormous. And the situation in developing, and these are developed countries where the government policies are in place, the government has the capacity to intervene rapidly with funds and so on. And the case in developing countries in Mediterranean is even worse. When we look at the proportion of enterprises that reduce their activity because of COVID-19, when there was this report published by HCP recently, and they show that 40% of enterprises in Morocco, they had to reduce their activity by 50% or more because of the COVID. I think this is very significant negative shock on the economy. And if digitalization has a role to play, I think we should go for it for 100%. So as Rim mentioned, we launched this online survey in EMEA to assess digital preparedness in South Mediterranean countries. So the survey is still ongoing, and what am I going to show you are some very few preliminary results. but I think they're still interesting in this subject. So in general, what we can observe is that South Mediterranean companies or SMEs find digital supports useful for their business. 59% of them find digital training to be useful, support for their business. 61% find assistance on digital transformation be useful. However, it was a bit to my surprise that only, less than half, just 30% find digital payment capacity to be useful. 30% find high quality of internet connectivity to be useful. And only 40% find internet security to be useful. So to my understanding, these firms, for these firms, infrastructure or digital infrastructure is not much of a problem. What they need most is training and assistance on transformation. Okay, and also the firms are very aware of the importance of digitalization. 83% of them confirm that digitalization is an essential part of their strategic agenda. I think that's very interesting. And when we look at the proportion of online sales, we see that 35% of the firms who responded to our survey, they don't have any online sales. And the rest of them have at some sort. So 65% have some sort of online sale. And only 5% have more than half of their sales happening online. So for me, it means that we have this launch in online sale. Many try to access digital markets, but to a very, it's at the beginning of the stage. People are not very well developed. And the last point I want to raise is their awareness about the COVID-19. So we asked them whether they find that COVID-19 has contributed to the acceleration of digitalization for their company, and 84% confirm. And I think this is very interesting because it shows that when we are facing a shock, many people try to act and adapt. And I think that's one of the interesting results of this research. And thank you for your attention. I think that's all I had to say.
Thank you very much, Yagane. So this is I would say the preliminary results of our research, which currently what we would try also to do is to focus it a little bit further onto the CCI. And to allow us to get further information, further data from this sector, where we can find in the Mediterranean and eventually later on in Africa. So thank you very much for this, Yagane. Now I would like to move to the next speaker. Nizar Hariri. So Nizar, he is an associate professor and also researcher at the Faculty of Economics in San Joseph University in Lebanon. Nizar has worked a lot on heritage, on cultural economics, and also urban economics. So he has this very interesting mix, and this is extremely interesting for the research we are going to continue doing. And also he contributed to the UNESCO, UNDP, and also MedCulture and other projects report on this specific sector. So I would say that you are an expert in the CCI, and we are very happy to have you with us today. Please, Nizar, the floor is yours.
So hello, everybody, and let me first start by thanking you for inviting me today, and to thank also all the panelists and the audience. I'll start by giving a general description of the CCI in Mediterranean countries. and then move on to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 and to assess this digital shifts in arts and culture today, whether it is or not a concrete solution, and maybe if I have time about some other solutions also. So first, as it was already said, the CCI cover a wide range of economic activities and subsectors, from performing arts or traditional arts to architecture services, design, or video games. And it has a very important contribution to GDP and employment, around 5% on average, roughly, we can say this. So like 5% contribution to GDP and to the creation of added value, as well as 5% of the labor force are employed in the creative sector. Actually, these are the figures in, or the average in European countries, and also in our study that we, in Arab Mediterranean countries, it's also ranged between 3% and 5%. So, it is a very important sector that contributes a lot to growth, but also to cultural diversity, to shape identity. But at the same time, artists and creators are usually living in precarious situations. So this is true in Europe, where around 30% of creatives and artists are working as freelancers. So according to Eurostat, and these figures should be doubled for Arab Mediterranean countries, because usually informal work in general and specifically in the creative sector is above 60%. So artists and creative, they work under various conditions of informality as freelancers, as seasonal jobs, or temporary jobs, or a second job, etc. Today in Europe, we have around 1 million jobs that are threatened, and we don't have actually concrete data for Arab Mediterranean countries, but we can imagine that the impact is very, very severe. Most probably, CCI are the most severely hit by the COVID-19, with tourism and hotel and restaurants, of course. But these two sectors are also generally intertwined. So cultural operators and individual artists and creatives are threatened in the short run and in the long run, because not only they are threatened in their jobs and their income, some of them works as in the informal sector, so they don't benefit from social protection, for example, but they are also threatened in the long run because actually this 19 restriction and it has an opportunity cost in terms of career path, in terms of reputation effect, in terms of making a name for an artist. It's very important. So just to imagine the impact of the COVID-19, we have to really imagine the situation of new artists or young artists, those who were waiting like to make their breakthrough this year, and they saw their shows canceled, for example. So these new entrants make us think that really the impact of the COVID-19 and the social distancing and the confinement will have really a long-lasting impact on the creative sector, most probably worse than the 2008 financial crisis. And maybe that's why also a lot of artists and creatives had initiatives of sharing for free their work, whether on digital platform or sometimes physically, like we saw a lot of artists giving shows from their balcony or giving like an open air shows sometimes, or drive-through events, drive-through cinema, for example. And this is very remarkable because to see people sharing their work and their labor for free, it's not something that you can see in other economic sectors. This is very remarkable because that's what makes the specificity of cultural activities. So at the same time, it was very important for artists and creatives to continue producing, to continue to work, and to share, of course, their work on digital platforms when possible, to shift to live streaming, for example. But at the same time, this initiative or this digital shift raises a lot of questions. So, should it be for free? Yes or no? A lot of cultural operators were committed, of course, to free shows, but is it sustainable on the long run? These creatives who shared their work for free, would they be able to monetize their creations or their work in the future? Is it something that will help them to establish a name or to gain in reputation? Yes or no? And of course, maybe the most important question is these free shows, should they be subsidized by the state? Yes or no? Whole community for artists and for creatives in order to satisfy this increased demand, because there was an increased demand for cultural goods during the confinement and during this period of social distancing. So what will be the role of the state in defending these arts in danger? And of course, in some market-led creative economies, we can also talk about the risk of total collapse of the creative sector, such, for example, in Palestine or in Lebanon, where most of the supply comes from the private sector and without any subsidies from the state. So to talk more specifically about the impact of the COVID-19, of course, we should remember some sectors were an increased demand, and they experienced an increased income also, like digital arts or TV shows, series, video on demand, etc. So people were confined, or people are not capable of going out. So there was a huge demand for creative goods. But on the other hand, some subsectors were facing like total collapse, especially books, performing arts, music halls, opera, etc. So they were the most severely hit, and in some sense, we can say that maybe the whole creative sector was somehow to stabilize, or to some kind of stabilization. So some subsectors were declining, others were gaining a lot of demand or increased demand, but at the same time, there's a huge risk here to see the big operators gaining a huge market shares, while most of the small or medium-sized cultural enterprises, and especially freelancers, experiencing some really severe social and economic conditions. So if we consider the situation of the cultural institution like music hall, opera houses, theater, a lot of them were capable to switch to online exhibition and shows due to public subsidies and due to national programs, or sometimes European also programs. But if we look at the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, and we look at the situation in the Arab Mediterranean countries, we find out that there was like a total shutdown also of creative of the creative sector. If you ask, we tried to have an assessment of the COVID-19 impact in Lebanon, for example. So it was very difficult, of course, during this period to have a comparison between countries. So we're really focused on the country, and most of the artists in Lebanon, 90% of the artists shared that they had zero income during 2020. So they sustained their activity, themselves. Sorry, they sustained themselves through a different job, and this is also, I guess, the same situation could be found in other Arab Mediterranean countries. To talk about this digitalization, I think it could be said that it is kind of a half solution. It's a good solution on the short run because it solved a demand problem. So people were capable of accessing some cultural events even in time of confinement. Yet the supply side, the problem remain, generally speaking, remain dependent on state actions. So we see countries like Germany or France, Spain, and Italy having like very important public programs to support art and cultures, while countries like UK, for example, where it's more market-driven, suffering from a lot of restrictions and a lot of closing, definitive closing of cultural enterprises. The same could be said about Arab Mediterranean countries. So, especially in the East, more than Africa. So, we found out that, for example, in Morocco and Tunisia, artists were capable of sustaining their activity because they were also relying on international, but for example, in a country like Lebanon, where we are suffering from economic crisis plus the most severe financial crisis in our history, and from the COVID-19, there was a total lockdown, a shutdown, sorry, of all the creative sector, except for jewelry's design, for example, because this is very characteristic. Also, people tend to buy a lot of jewelry in time of crisis because they consider it as a way to save and to save the value of their money. So finally, if we talk about the other possible solutions, so I talked already about some state-driven solution. Where Germany, of course, was like the champion in Europe with a 50 billion program to support freelancers, for example. But what we also saw that, and this is also very specific to arts and to culture in general, we saw during this year the creation of a lot of solidarity funds coming from the civil society. And that was very sorry, that was very important. For example, for Lebanon, relying on a large diaspora, we had a lot of funds coming from philanthropic sources in order to sustain artists and to maintain some theater and avoiding the total closing of these activities. So that's it. I thank you for your. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nizar. This is very clear, I would say, presentation on the obstacles that are facing the sector. But I think you raised very important aspects. One of them is how to monetize the intangibles. I mean, you mentioned, for example, that now they are offering, or the CCI is offering, some of the activities for free because of the COVID-19 situation. I don't think it's the only sector, probably, or maybe it's one of the sectors that provide this. I mean, research also does a lot of free, I would say, activities, you know, sometimes dedicated to enhance knowledge and also enhance innovation over time. But one thing, what you mentioned, and I think this is a clear topic for research in economics, it's how to monetize the intangibles and how to ensure that nowadays, also with the platformization, I would say it, or the rise of the platforms, how to create a business model which can create this value without really having to, you have to find that business model, which in reality, it has happened in many other sectors. For example, if you look at how Uber is making its funds, I think it's clear that there is a lot of work there to think about. The second point you mentioned, and I absolutely agree with you, and it's the role of the state. Especially as you called it yourself, it's an endangered type of sector that we're talking about. I mean, especially with the COVID, but also, I mean, in the case, for example, of Lebanon, what has happened with the explosion and so on, this has created also further disruptions in the sector, and some of the players have been hardly hit. And I wonder what type of state we're talking about. See, if you are in some states that function and there are some institutional certainty and so on, I think you can rely on the state. But the problem is, in some countries, probably the state is not doing what is expected from it to do. Another aspect which I think we need to focus on, and we develop further research on it also, is the role of, you mentioned, the civil society. Civil society has been quite active in certain aspects, especially, for example, in countries where the state does not, does what is expected from it. So this is also a role for the, but then it has to be organized and most probably monitored. But the problem, it's by who and by what, and all this is, we go back to the same problem. So thank you very much. I think this is a really a nice discussion. I would like to directly go to Sana. Sana Ouchtati, she's the coordinator of the Cultural Relations Platform. She's also the founder of SO Culture, or Coach, I think Ivan said. She's
That's it. So called, that's it.
So-called. She has great knowledge, since I know Sana since many years. She was talking to me about the cultural field. And of course, as economist, in finance, I was listening to her and I was saying, hey, how can we do something together? And we figured it out now. I think I'm very happy. Also, she's very well, she has ample knowledge on EU processes, policies, instruments, also dedicated to external relations, and again, the cultural dialogue and intercultural dialogue and all of this. She's on it since many years. Sana, I'm very happy that you are with us today, and please, the floor is yours. We listen.
Thank you for having me. Actually, I've been disconnected at a certain moment. I think when in the big part of the presentation of Nizar, I'm sorry for that. I don't know if it's a Brussels issue or Barcelona issues, but if I'm disconnected again, just let me know by WhatsApp or whatsoever, and then I can join whenever it's possible. I don't know, Zoom has been a little bit hectic today. So as I said, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for having me. As you said, Dream, I'm running this consultancy company based in Brussels, working in the field of international cultural relations. And I'm currently coordinating this cultural relations platform, which is an EU-funded project. And it's looking at strengthening cultural relations between the EU and partner countries, among them, of course, the MENA region. This project is led by consortium, by the Goethe Institute, and it's in partner with ITM, which is the International Performing Arts Network, the European Culture Foundation in Amsterdam, and the University of Siena. And within this framework of the cultural relations platform, we are currently conducting a research with the help of the University of Siena and some independent experts from the region, from the MENA region, looking at the impact of COVID on culture and creative sector. We have a global mandate for this global coverage for this research, and looking also at the impact on international cultural relations. So the content of my presentation is stemming from one side from my knowledge in the sector and within the region, and also from the first outcomes of the analysis that we are conducting. Many elements have been already mentioned by Nizar, but I would like to go back to some of them and maybe insist on some elements. So first, I would like to recall some characteristic of the sector of the culture and creative industries that explains why it makes them so vulnerable and fragile today. So first, there is a gap between the highly concentrated demand in this sector from big players and from big institutions in the countries themselves or outside of the country, and the weak and very, very fragmented structure of the sector. Yeah, as Nizar has mentioned it, there is structural weaknesses in terms of jobs in the sector. There are very small firms working in this sector and a lot of self-employed persons, artists, cultural operators, and individuals. And as it has been mentioned in other fora yesterday, the statut de l'artiste, the status of the artist, is not something that really exists in the MENA region. Some countries are working on it, but it's not something that it's recognized and that it's simply existing. And this is really makes it very difficult when you have in the case you have some support from public authorities. These workers, they do not have access to safety nets. Especially, we noticed this within still now. I mean, within the crisis when it started, but still. Now, if you are not registered, if you are not recognized, if you are a freelancer, but not recognized as an artistic freelancer, then you cannot apply for funds that are being made available by public institutions, in the case they are, of course, made available. Also, there is a lack of data that it's combined with the informal nature of part of the CCIs in the region, that it makes it difficult to assess the impact of COVID, actually, and to address concerns, and even to assess the contribution of the sector to the economy and to the wealth. This is something that we all want to do, and that we still have a lot of difficulty to do it in, I would say, in many parts of the world, not only in the MENA region, but it's very, very difficult to do it in the MENA region. There are also gaps in assessing the situation across the region, between countries, but also within the countries themselves, between big big cities, capitals, and other cities, and also across the sector. You might find easily data about the film industries and audiovisual in general, but much less about visual art, for instance. So there are some consequences that are, I would say, that are very much felt at micro level, at in short term, and others that are really quite visible in the longer run. And there are also some impact and consequences that you can see at the level of different subsectors of the culture and creative industries. And I go quickly through them. When it comes to the consequences at micro level and in short and medium term, we first, of course, we have to recall and remember here that that the crisis has hit countries in the region that were already experiencing economic backdrops, wars, inequalities, uprisings, lack of democratic spheres, etc. And it's the same for the sector itself. The crisis has also affected the entire chain of creative value, meaning the creation, the production, the development, the dissemination, and also the access. And of course, as it has been said, it created a very drastic decrease in earnings. We don't forget also that this restriction in mobility and the travel bans to go to Europe or elsewhere or between countries in the region exacerbated a lot the fragility of the sector that it's already suffering from a lot of problems related to regimes for artists and cultural operators. If we want to look at the impact at long term, first we see that there will be most probably a reduction in both supply and demand of cultural content. There is a decrease already in production, there is a decrease in purchasing power, and a huge crisis that hits the tourism sector, and I will come back to it in a couple of minutes. There is also a decrease in public and private funding. Of course, public funding is directed mainly to emergency and recovery actions and initiative, and to priority sectors. And of course, culture is not a priority sector in many countries and also in the region. And for the private funding, also many big cultural foundations or private foundations in Europe and elsewhere had, of course, they have today less of financial capacity to fund the sector. It doesn't mean that it didn't exist, or there are no funding that has been disposed in the region during this period, and I'll give some examples later, but still there is really, I mean, even private funders, they have less financial capacities. And of course, there is a huge rise in inequalities in the region and also in the countries themselves. We've tried to look at the different subsectors within the culture and creative sector, and it goes without saying that of course, the tourism sector has very long and strong link to cultural products, and CCIs are very, important and are strongly hit by this crisis in the tourism sector. Global figures state that the cultural tourism represent almost 40% of world tourism. And according to UNESCO, the tourism and travel sector in the Arab countries will lose 126 billion euros, putting more or less 4 million jobs at risk. Among them, of course, when you talk about cultural tourism, cultural workers, and also fragile cultural structures and cultural operators. I can give an example. For instance, in Morocco, at the end of May, the Federation of Cultural and Creative Industries, because there is a Federation of Cultural and Creative Industries in Morocco, estimated that the health emergency affected more than 1,100 organizations, and that there has been a drop in revenues of 185 million euros, representing 70% of the revenues, and that the situation has put 100,000 jobs at risk. When it comes to museums, for instance, the UNESCO and ICOM is the International Council of Museums, they argue that at least 1 in 10 museums will not open again even after the COVID crisis, and that this percentage will reach 40% in Arab countries. And this study has been made on a sample of 95,000 museums. Among them, only 0.5% of the museums are in the Arab countries. Books, as Nizar said, also this is also a sector that has had big cancellations of fairs, and it damaged the publishing sector, of course, and all the channels of disseminations of and distribution networks of books. The international fairs in Abu Dhabi, in Riyadh, in Lebanon also, Bahrain, etc., which are really, big moments and big where all the sector from the editing to translation to publishing, etc., meet. All this has been cancelled, and you can imagine what kind of how much it damages the editing and publishing sector. Film, of course, that are depending very, very much on European and international co-production. The sector has been heavily hit because of because all these co-productions have reduced themselves the funds, and co-production were not launched anymore. And at the same time, in many countries, we've seen that because of social distancing, you could not even produce and meet to really implement and realize these movies and films. Before going into digitalization, maybe I give some examples. Yes, true, as you said, Dream, we've seen a lot. I mean, if you look at the region, we've seen many actions that have been pushed and promoted by NGOs, by what we call the civil society. Different actors have been really quite active, and they even formed alliances to do advocacy and to advocate towards, whenever it was possible, towards public authorities, to make sure that they give some attention to the art sector and to culture and creative industries. We see it all over the region. In some countries, there have been some measures that have been taken by the government, like in Morocco and in Tunisia. In Morocco, they have launched a Corona Pandemic Management Fund, and this fund has it has been distributed by the Moroccan Copyright Office. They have distributed around 3 million euros in favor of authors, creators, etc. In Tunisia, they have put the Fonds de Relance Culture, and that was an interesting fund because it was a fund, implemented and nurtured by different parties, the ministry, some philanthropists, private organizations, and also funds from the EU. And that was for, it was a rapid response fund mechanism, and it's supposed to evolve into a structural permanent fund. It has been launched, yes. Some actors have benefited from it, but there is an interesting link with digitalization that I can make later when it comes really to the implementation of this fund and how much it has reached organizations in the sector. In Lebanon, we've seen also many actions, but by private donors, as it has been said, mainly by AFAC, which is the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, Al-Mawrid al-Thaqafi, also cultural resource. They are both based in Lebanon, and there has been a lot of, I mean, they have issued many grants to help artists during this period. We've seen also some intergovernmental cooperation, or maybe the premise, I mean, the beginning of some cooperation within the ALESCO, which organized different meetings with cultural ministers from the Arab region, and they, of course, they put production, digitalization, cultural production, and distribution as priorities for the next coming period. Coming back now to digitalization, I totally agree that it's really a huge opportunity for the sector, for sure, for the arts sector in general, for CCIs in particular, for the region. I mean, there are huge opportunities that are being offered, and I think the region has to embrace this digital transformation. That's clear. I mean, it's undeniably a trend that it's present in our life every day, and this is really will be part of the future. But I'm not that optimistic because it will really depend a lot on how this will be implemented. Because very often it is erased from speeches and thoughts that when we talk digital, we talk first resources. So we need resources to build devices. We need resources to build infrastructure. We need resources to create new technologies. We need resources to treat data. We need resources to store the data. And also it's very material. So it depends on the accessibility. It depends on how much you can, I mean, users and how much they can afford it to have this digital I mean, devices and digital access. And it has also environmental impacts, but we won't enter into that because that's already something else. When you know that there is 60%, I mean, 60% of the population in the MENA region only is using internet, and half of the world population is using internet, you think that there are some limits to digitalization. So all the, maybe the less optimistic or maybe some negative aspects of the digitalization that I would like to put forward are also at the same time some directions to think how we can improve the access to digitalization for the service, in this case, in our discussion today, for the CCIs. Because CCIs don't have the expertise in the region to move to the online environment. As I said, it's a very fragmented sector with small structured structures, very unstaffed. I almost finished. You came on time in 2 minutes. So and they are lacking resources. So resources will be needed to for this digital transition. Also, you have to keep in mind that you have an offer. So you have to offer cultural content from one side, and from the other side, you have an audience. So you have to have the resources to be able to put forward the offer, but you need also a large access to give to the audience for the online content. Nizar has mentioned also that a lot of content is free of charge, so this is something to look at. And to finish, there are other considerations that we should always keep in mind when we talk about digitalization is in the culture sector, that there are risks of, it's not only about IPR and piracy, there are risks of flattening of the cultural diversity when you have a kind of mainstream offer from big players, from the GAFA or from others, that kills all the small industries. We have poor skills in the region, very poor skills in the digital area that have to be upgraded. We have also, we have to standardize the processes of production and distributions. This is also not existing. And there are also other risks such as breaches on rights, mass surveillance, violation of private life, the use of commercial data. And the last thing also, when you see that many projects in the regions are targeting as beneficiaries and as audience women and young people, the technology sector is very much masculinized, if I can put it in this word, with this word, and you have a lot of non-regional references, and it's a word where you have a lot of men working in it. If you, I'm putting it in the context of the region and this desire to really help and empower women and youth. And I will stop here and might add a couple of things in the next part and session.
Thank you very much, Saneh. It was very, very comprehensive, and it will give us a lot of food for
work
and a lot of aspects to think about in the mapping exercise, because we are also trying to do some work under this project I mentioned to you. And I'm also very glad that you joined the expert group. So we have established a technical expert group on the CCI in the Mediterranean. And I'm very pleased, really, you are with us. Because with your expertise on the sector, you will guide us into where we should go. Because again, this sector is very specific. I see serious structural problems, and you mentioned them all. I think we need to look at it very, very carefully. At the same time, you painted, unfortunately, a very gloomy picture, which is scaring me in a certain manner, because we are trying to support a sector which is really endangered. And this is not going to be an easy endeavor at all. So you concur to the assertion of Nizar that the sector, it is endangered. And I am not sure, based on what I hear from you, that the action and the support actions that are put in place by the public authorities, especially in our region, is enough to bring this sector back to what it was before COVID-19. So yes, and I take note of all the aspects related to beyond IPR issues, the skilling or reskilling. I think this is important, because not only you have to reskill in the sector itself, but also take into account the digitalization and the digital transition. Thank you very much, Saneh. I would like, without further ado, move to Jihen Boutiba. Jihen, she's, as I mentioned previously, the head of BUSINESSMED, and she's our partner, or her team, of course, her institution, in the CREACT for Med. Jihen, she's the head of, as I mentioned, the Union of Mediterranean Confederation of Enterprises, which is, she has held this position since 2014. BUSINESSMED is an association of 22 employers organization in the Euromed region. And Jihen has proven expertise on the SME development and the social dialogue with syndicates. And I think I let Jihen share with us what the private sector, from your point of view, can do in this dire situation of the CCI, and what can we do also together within the initiative that we have launched not a long time ago to support this sector. Of course, we're not talking about a huge initiative, but okay, sometimes small initiatives might have high impact. Please, Jihen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reem. And I'm intervening after all these professors, so it's not the same point of view, it's the point of view of the private sector. Of course, it's not the same concerns, so we are most of all aware of the sector's capacity to involve young people and generate jobs and growth. Cultural cooperation has, over the last year, concentrated on professionalizing and strengthening the culture and creative industries, goods and services for all. But the support granted by international to the programs to the sectors has enabled talent to surface, initiative to be set up, partnership to be created, and developed, policies and funding tools to be put in place. As Sana was saying, it's thanks to the donors, but what's after? So beyond these positive results, the effort made felt to achieve a sustainable structure of the sector to allow its full contribution to social development of the target countries and region. It is therefore necessary to move further and implement a new generation of cultural public policies, promoting, coordinating and integrated approach to the global value chain and providing the appropriate institutional framework to enable the private to ensure the continuity of the activity, access to the national, regional and international market, and create jobs opportunity. To this end, it is necessary to combine government policies that can create a framework the generation of businesses and industries with policies at local level capable of creating a climate favorable to creative talent. The synergies of these policies should make it possible to use activity for sustainable development in partner countries. So in phasing why cultural and creative industry need to be actively supported economically. So creative and cultural jobs are often related to insecure job. As we saw with this period of COVID-19, only stressed their need for public and private partnership support, so the PPP, the 3PP. Moreover, creative workers and entrepreneurs have hardly access to social protection, and this is something important for us as employers and of course for our partners as trade unions in terms of social protection because of the nature of their job. Most of them are on the informal work. CCIs also relies on various multi-sectoral supply chain, which can be invaluable in terms of indirect job involved. The way they operate makes CCIs unique and particularly exposed, as Sana said, and my the previous speaker, it's a vulnerable work, I mean, for them. And social between employers, social partners, actually, private sector, trade union, the civil society, as you said, REAM, and the government, mostly regrouping multi-stakeholder dimension of dialogue left behind key role to play as per the CCI. Most of the sector they cover is informal work, and find key solution to formalize these CCIs within the southern countries. In the overwhelming majority of the countries who took drastic measures with the considerable economic backlashes to fight this pandemic, CCIs were not considered as essential services and therefore had to face an almost complete shutdown on their activities sometimes. If not, so those with businesses model follow a venue-based approach, like museums, book fair, festivals. Even of the museums has a virtual approach on the online to visit. They always had different terms of access to finance, of course, due to the misperception of those sectors from credit institutions who mainly rely on tangible assets and or immediate wealth creation capacity. So how can we support as a private sector or as financer and create these opportunities for CCI? We have to increase fundings and access to the non-profit organization or funds funding to compensate for the shift in terms of public expenditure towards more urgent industries, to find like funds like React for Med presented by RIM. It's a project with the sub-grantees, potential synergy with other sector-based tourism. This include their multiplier effects on other sectors. They are in internal industrial relationship with cultural industry and inter-conception linkages. It also includes not only the tourism sector, but also the contribution of cultural industries to design and marketing or other sectors. Encourage the production that aim at shaping a healthy social economic environment, support CCI in reaching out the new market where potential exploited demand exists, enable the CCI knowledge sharing between organization of employers in terms of impact assessment and recovery plan for the private sector point of view. Also, public administration are not necessarily fully aware of the entire social potential of the culture and of the link between culture and employment, trade, internationalization, education, or vocational training. Moreover, in many countries, public administration still need to overcome the challenge of efficient governance, the decentralization of their services, and their proximity with the actors of creative sector. An integrated approach of the global value chain, including distribution networks and circuits, is necessary. So the CCI value chain has to be supported with the resources, strategy, and methodology. Creators must benefit from an enabling environment, including professional training, fundings from projection for contents of or proposals, legal rights instrument, market channel and information tools through which to exhibit and reach out to audiences. Culture entrepreneurship needs to be socially valued by proposing appropriate information and awareness raising initiative, while the creation and development of MSMEs should also be supported with enabled administrative procedure and tax insensitive. That's why I was telling to you this morning, Rim, we need this part of visibility and promotion. in order to inform not only the final beneficiary, which is the startups or the existing CCI, but also the government, and to sensitize them. So the culture and education policies should foster people creative spirit, structuring culture and creative ecosystem that, among other effects, also enable for decent work condition for professional and the CCIs, as well as for the artists. So investment in innovation and equity leads to increased number of cultural and creative companies and businesses that are fully set up and functioning thanks to better access to funding mechanism, innovation, technology approaches, and high level of mobility. Of course, now for the moment, we have no mobility. So the purpose for digitalization is very important. So investment should be regulated towards startups in disciplinary creative hubs and incubators or pre-existing initiatives that have already tested innovative approaches to cultural and creative content creation and production. Professional exchange and training, innovative and alternative funding mechanism can be also welcomed. On access to funding, the CCIs follow hybrid economic models with multiple sources of financing and income, and which in turn open access to a new market. In most countries, the existing limited funding opportunities and in accessing bank loans and leases do not enable CCIs to achieve sustainability. The intangible nature of culture assets and the lack of market intelligence and business skills related to culture and creative industry among both MSMEs and financial intermediaries contribute to this situation, unfortunately. Diverse funding instruments such as venture capital, financial guarantees, subsidized working spaces, etc., already exist, but should be further developed in order to enable for a sustained impact for the sector of CCIs. So access to market of culture and creative goods and services is not sufficiently supported nor strengthened. A number of factors from dissuasive tax, regulatory environment, and inappropriate legal framework, which is here the place of social dialogue and the importance of having this public-private dialogue. The legal framework is very important in our countries. So to the lack of professionalization of the actor in the culture value chain and the challenges of the new economy still hinder proper access of culture and creative industries to local, regional, and international markets. Circulation of cultural goods and services, including digital distribution, leads to increased access to culture and creative, to increased visibility of artists and cultural and creative professionals, to audience development and engagement. So still free online access poses the question of monetarizations. You know that in some countries, I took the example of Tunisia, unfortunately, we don't have the trust, the 100% trust, as you saw in the study of your colleague of EMEA, it's 40% of trust. I don't think it's 40% of trust on monetarization of the internet. So, sorry, Rim, I think I have took all the time. So I just add two more things. Also, do not forget the dimension of the education, which is really, really important on vocational training, capacity building, and entrepreneurship. These should be the key elements in setting up the cultural policy. So one other thing, the CCI encompass a range of stakeholders. As I said, most of all the stakeholders, CSOs, SMEs, international organizations, have to stick together in terms of increasing multi-stakeholder partnership should be promoted through the region, North-South cooperation and also South-South cooperation in terms of transfer of technical skill. And I come back and I end up with the three points. I didn't have time to take digitalization. Did my time finish, Rim, or I can add two more?
Yes, some time ago, but it's okay. Conclude so I can go to the next speaker, and then we can have a quick discussion. because I think I will extend this webinar up to 16:45, so 4:45, just for 15 minutes, but not for you, Jihen, it's for everybody.
So I would just end up with a final remark. So we should give more attention to the indirect measurement, of course, rather than the direct measurement of the economic contribution of culture industry. We should more observe and investigate interaction between the cultural sector and other industries, such as in inter-industry trade, knowledge transfer, and network externalities. We should assess to the multiplier effect by measuring the indirect spin-off of the culture sector unemployment. I mean, how many indirect jobs are generated per direct jobs? And I get back also to my final word, it's informal work. So it's finished, Reem. I don't think you have more questions for me.
No, thank you very much. I think it was very clear, and of course I see a large agenda for the sector. I mean, you have put it in a few minutes, but again, this is also linked to the fact that there is a need to much more resources and capacity building, which in reality has been, I mean, we will see how things evolve and how this sector will continue to evolve and develop. The next speaker, I'm very happy to have with us Mauricio O'Brien. He is the country manager for Spain of the European Crowdfunding Network. Mauricio, he's an expert of crowdfunding, and I think there might be a role for crowdfunding based on what we heard. In our region, of course, he's dealing with the European crowdfunding network, so probably there is some lessons or to learn from there. He's also an advocate of social innovation, and also passionate about eco-design thinking and co-creation. I think this is very interesting also in the cultural sector, and this is all about co-creation and eco-design thinking. And also about social entrepreneurship. So please, Mauricio, you have please 10 minutes if we can stick to them, so then we can have a few further minutes for the discussion with Mohammed, and then we can have a few points with the audience.
I'll try to do my best, as I've seen. I'm going to share my presentation with you for the sake of this panel. I do appreciate a lot your invitation. I'm a big fan of heritage and cultural industries because I've been dedicating myself especially to this focus. And on today's session, I wanted to bring in the topic of crowdfunding for the cultural and creative industries in the COVID times. How do we relate to that? There was many topics that are already blooming out in the different, with my different colleagues this afternoon. And I do believe that crowdfunding could complement many of the different issues. Our organization is based in Brussels. We represent, it's a nonprofit organization that we represent the different network or the different actors within the network of crowdfunding, this ecosystem that's already existing in Europe. We aim to innovate, promote, and represent the different actors in the creative industry, okay, in the crowdfunding industry, in order to innovate and bring in concepts as the fintech within crowdfunding, within blockchain, within crypto assets, could bring into the funding mechanisms. We have to understand that as my profile, especially as a Spanish representative, brings in our knowledge and extended information that we could share. But making a point, especially on the topic of today, we're talking about how digitalization brings in a new scenarios and where to work. We imagined our audiences as something passive and something that it's awaiting for us. But I do believe that in the creative industries, we are more aware of the pulse and the sort of energy and passion which culture brings in as a community. You know, is a very interesting factor in how the fan effect of culture within the different fields and actions within any country are participating. It's something that we have in common. Knowing how the digitalization and how is it connected to funding. We imagine that community, we imagine those collectives, we imagine alternative ways of funding into new systems of distribution of that funding. This is where internet comes through. We may understand as that infrastructure, digital infrastructure that connects us through our different areas, topics, scenarios, whatever project we may bring in, and we connect with an audience more directly with our community. No matter what it is or where it is, we have a chance of expanding our links of action and our radius of proximity throughout more digital relationships. You know, we could find how the different topics related, for example, to the funding itself, it is highlighted already for over the more than 10 years since the crowdfunding has been existing. We have to take into stock one of the reports of the European Commission in 2014 was already highlighting the role that managers have in ensuring the sustainability of crowdfunding platforms. They did a clear difference in between what it would be more democratic or philanthropic tools that are sort of based on that transparency, cooperation, democratic practice, understanding it as a true alternative to the traditional mechanisms of funding, and understanding that those emotional or even social values that could be highlighted in the campaigns that are being pushed through crowdfunding. The other pillar would be a more for-profit organization, redefining what that area more into entrepreneurship purely. You know, we may believe how it could be a clarifying tool for the interest or the validation of different projects. How summing up that crowdfunding advantages with models of innovation, dissemination, and validating those ideas are crucial for donors, for those persons that are already backers that are putting money into different campaigns, and to the promoters who are initiating those projects. We have to understand that there's different typologies related to this sort of two pillars, in which we have that alternative more related to donation-based crowdfunding. We have the reward-based crowdfunding. With these two are already well aware in the creative industries. It's something that it's up and running, and it's already not something that is not new. We have even new innovative ways to create that more patronage through the crowd, which is crucial, and the more private organization of crowdfunding and the typology related to financial services purely are related, for example, to lending or equity-based crowdfunding. I probably jumped this slide, but for you to have the description of each, you know, if you're not aware of how the mechanisms of this different typologies work out, donation is a more solidary economy. Reward-based, it could be understood as a pre-purchase situation, or even donation to a project for something back in return. Crowdfunding lending, it's a loan basically, and equity, it's pure investment. If we think about what is going on in volume in the European Union, we have different speeds, different amounts of money that has been pledged through this technology. And we must highlight at the top of the score, obviously the 7 billion euros in the English market. It's something that it's aware, and even has been pointed out that it's understood as a market purely. And we have other actors that are participating. We do have to highlight that crowdfunding does not compensate entirely what is traditional funding. It could be a supplement to what it is. Understanding this parallel conceptualization of funding could bring us into what are the true motivations of users to use crowdfunding. We believe that this has come, as it was highlighted in that report, brings a factor of transparency. It brings the factors of solidarity, of direct cooperation within a community, and the legitimacy for those initiatives that are already standing and are more cohesive with the crowd that are backing that project. What this brings is a code of ethics that comes out or stands out from the traditional models in a conscious or unconscious way. This same parameters of participation, it could be related to the COVID situation. We have crowdfunding had still been up and running, even though we had lockdowns. There was different platforms that were activating all their entire resources to keep backing up projects, even reducing their commissions or vanish them for their purpose and their mission of helping people to fund projects, in which we could highlight, once again, the connection that there is within crowdfunding with the situation in the COVID, highlighting that solidarity and cooperation thanks to funding. If we have a clear focus and we apply that magnified light into the cultural and creative industries, we could even try to tackle one by one. We say, okay, what happens with individuals, with citizens that have initiatives, that have that creative pulse to organize and arrange any type of product, from music to art to crafts? Well, they may not have access to that funding. Could crowdfunding bring in an alternative tool for finance? Yes, it does. You know, we have this tons of examples of auto production for culture from the years past, even in the coronavirus situation, and it's something that it has to be pushed. As it is a collective finance instrument, we have to talk about the community and how to create a more cohesive approach towards the mission that the different collectives may have. Therefore, we may have festivals, we have big initiatives that have a community support, that are nonprofit organizations that have a mission or have a legacy behind them, you know, that they could bring in a more hard push into the needs for financing. We could obviously tackle what it is, the needs and necessities of entrepreneurs, driving their initiatives with their goals, with their business objectives, and crowdfunding may give them access to funding mechanisms that could explain in more open circles. Cultural institutions may fundraise in a different way, participation, engagement through citizenship, or the policy making. It could be thanks to these initiatives related to civic crowdfunding, in which could bring in a more innovative waves of funding. And at the last thing would be at the European level. How could we combine crowdfunding itself with the different EU calls or EU common policy related to crowdfunding? There's many different examples in which we could work out. Just to not to bother you, just I'll put this information up online so you can see different examples related to the heritage and or how big institutions and as the Louvre has already used the tools and mechanisms into very classic ways of funding restoration from many years, and it's still up and running through their platform, you know, in whatever purpose. Or even proposals from the Irish government in which they own and run a crowdfunding platform for the creative industries in the different areas. Or even the match funding aspect, how instead of as we were saying, sort of be a substitute of public engagement, public authorities, how could we plug in a technological approach into crowdfunding by multiplying any backup, any citizens' engagement with the project by doubling up the initiatives. There's going to be a lot of information that we could share, and I would like to also share with the audience that it will be completely accessible through our website if they're interested. And just I want to thank you again for the invitation, because we could build in bridges throughout this fintech approach with crowdfunding into a more agile and innovative ways of funding the creative industries, especially knowing that we have common scenarios at the EU level, knowing that in the COVID impact within creative industries, it's more than needed to articulate a proposal that it's outstanding in due the responsibility that we have into this project. So I just want to, I'm sorry if I speed it up a bit, but want to thank you once again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. It was very interesting, and at the same time, I think this also gives us some food for thought for the region, because in fact, what you are presenting is for the European Union, and hopefully with time, we could figure out how those crowdfunding platforms could be developed for the Mediterranean and beyond. But certainly we are extremely happy also that we are partnering with your network to learn a little bit more about this crowdfunding and applications of it, specifically for the CCI, and I'm very happy to have this collaboration with you. So without further ado, I would like to move forward to the discussion session led by Mohammed Elrazzaz, who is a project analyst at the Business Development and Employment Division at the Secretariat for the Union for the Mediterranean. Mohammed also, he is a passionate of culture, and he's a professor of Mediterranean heritage at the International University of Catalonia in Barcelona. And I'm very happy to have you again with us, Mohammed. Please, the floor is yours, and you can tell us a bit more about what the UFM is doing in this sector and your own assessment of the sector of the CCI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Reem. I'm very happy to be part of this webinar. Very interesting insights from all the panelists. I thank them all. And I would like to start with a tiny quote to set the scene a little bit. It's by the very famous French painter Henri Matisse. And he tells us that creativity takes courage. Probably the cave paintings in Lascaux and Altamira in France and Spain might be the very first demonstrations of the earliest birth pangs of human creativity in our region. This was back in the Paleolithic, in the Old Stone Age. But now, our region is one that gave birth to the world's first cities, its first academies and universities, its first theaters, its first conception of liberal arts and humanities. And again, it is this very same region that stands at the verge of a new creative metamorphosis, if you may, peering into a future where the economic, social, and cultural potential of creativity are harnessed through supporting policies and investments in the creative capital. Why creative capital? Because we share the view regarding creativity being one of the most important assets of our Euro-Mediterranean region. Our creative capital not only constitutes a major building block of regional identity, but also, as you all mentioned, a catalyst for socioeconomic progress in this region, for unlocking the full innovative potential of the region. Now, the new European Agenda for Culture and the new Work Plan for Culture, 2019-2022, underline the importance of cultural and creative industries for job creation, for economic growth, and for social cohesion. And the figures support this importance. You already mentioned that cultural and creative industries and clusters account for some 5% plus of the GDP for some countries and up to 7% of the employment landscape. But I would like to give you also some figures from the other end of the spectrum, from a microeconomic end. And here are some very interesting figures. To give you an example, the Apple App Store, which was founded in 2008, According to the official figures, in exactly a decade, so by the year 2018, here is the figure. It had sold, or better said, there have been up to 130 billion application downloads. If you monetize this, it exceeds the gross domestic product for entire economies. Also, to give you some figures, according to the outcome document of the second edition of the Creative Forum Ljubljana, which we co-organized with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia last year, every single job in the creative economy supports the creation of up to 23 other jobs in supporting sectors and related value chains. So the figures are overwhelming. Now, creativity is at the crust of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's co-essentially disruptive technologies that we're talking about. It has become the usual suspect, omnipresent in any discussion about the future of work, digital transformation, skills for the future, to the end of the long list. At the UFM, we're no strangers, neither to the talk nor to the walk. And here I would like to tell you a little bit about what we have been doing at the UFM Secretariat. So over the last couple of years, we held the first and the second edition of what has become the greatest aggregation and conglomeration of creative hubs, fab labs, and creative workers in the Euromed region, which is the Creative Forum Ljubljana. The third edition of this forum will take place in 2021, so next year, again in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with our partner GIZ on behalf of BMZ. When it comes to digitalization, we held our first event fully dedicated to digital transformation, a conference on digital transformation and digital skills for the future, in collaboration with the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs last year in Tallinn, also capitalizing and leveraging on the cutting edge technology and the leading flagship experience of Estonia in this field. I can go on, but what I also like to tell you from our experience at the UFM Secretariat, you already mentioned some of the challenges facing the sector, and not only in the post-COVID or the current COVID, but even pre-COVID. No, the lack of a standardized concept or definition of creative economy across the region, the lack of an enabling environment in terms of legislation, limited access to finance, to data, to markets, to technology. In some countries, they are not on par. No, the gradual disappearance of certain cultural and heritage crafts and practices, the inability of some countries to catch up with the fourth industrial revolution, to the end of the list. But we also have gathered some best practices. If you may, they are critical success factors for the creative sector in some of the countries across the region. Initial planning and mapping of the crafts and the industries rank very high among these success factors. Also, the engagement of the local communities and a full spectrum of stakeholders, giving them ownership of the process, because heritage belongs to the community. Its purpose is essentially social. I remember a very important quote by one of the godfathers of American heritage interpretation, David Lowenthal, and he tells us that heritage distills the past into icons of identity. It's what people identify with. It can be a very important building block when it comes to national and regional cultures. Now, investing in capacity building, promoting meaningful PPPs, providing sustainable financial instruments, protecting intellectual property rights. These are all among the best practices and the critical success factors that we came across. One last thing that I would also like to touch upon, apart from the digitalization and what it can introduce and facilitate for the cultural and creative industries, I believe it is fundamental, what I will say, that when it comes to creativity and beyond digitalization, we must take into account cultural mega trends affecting and acting upon this creative force in the region and in the whole world. I'm talking about such phenomenon as the post-truth condition, as mindfulness and new age spirituality, as increasing connectivity versus diminishing privacy. No, I'm talking about the liquid modernity. How could all of these megatrends be accounted for and factored in the creative process in this part of the world? Now, I would like to end with yet another quote. Obviously, I'm fond of quotes, but I think it comes very handy, this quote. When the first automobiles were produced back in 1886, at the time Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm II, said something. He said the following: I do not, actually to put it the other way around, I believe in horses. The automobile is no more than a transitory phenomenon. So it takes courage, vision, and will to full-heartedly adopt creativity and really unleash its full potential. And I trust that we all share this spirit today and every other day among the existing partners and stakeholders. With this, I bring my intervention to an end. Thank you very much, Reem, and everyone.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this inspiring words. I think within I would say, the dire state, or I would say the painted, gloomy state of the sector, which we heard from Sana and Nizar, and also the great opportunities that we see for the sector in terms of digitalization. I mean, yes, we are in a kind of a trade-off, which we need to understand and identify the, I would say, the forces that are driving the sector into what I call a beneficial evolution. Of course, taking into account what you mentioned, the mega trends. This is something we need to study further, and I turn my face to the team who will have to really dig further into the cultural mega trends, cultural heritages, and try really to factor this in terms of the evolution of the sector. It is clear to me that the sector needs urgently a public policy action, even further, not only to promote it, but also to maintain it, to keep the jobs that are clearly being destructed in this phase of the COVID. But beyond this, there are structural problems which are there, and they might remain. They might be even further deteriorated. So I think this has been clearly mentioned by Sana, who concurred also with this assessment, Nizar. I think also I would like to mention the role of the EU, because the European Union has been quite active in the sector to support the CCI, so in the different countries. Of course, these actions are very desirable. They have to continue. And again, this is an important sector that needs to be kept, and because as you mentioned, it has the cultural sector has this identity matters, and then of course, the dialogue between culture is very important via this type of expressions that should not end, and they should be promoted further. I see the time, so it's almost 4:49, so we have exceeded the time by almost 20 minutes. But I would like to ask one last question to each panelist. Based on the conditions that we've seen over the last months, and then the opportunities that you see in terms of digitalization, in terms of cultural mega trends, I don't know, maybe we need to understand a bit further this. We are not cultural experts, so that is why perhaps other experts can give us their view on how do they see the future of this sector going forward, and whether an action is still possible to save this sector from, the risk not only of COVID, but also of the difficulties in our region. I would start by Nizar. Just 30 seconds. What do you think?
Yes, very quickly. I've already talked about the study that we conducted this year in Lebanon about the creative sector. It was a study conducted by the Institute of Finance, by Saifullah of the Ministry of Finance Institute. I'm talking about it because I think it's very important to have this kind of large-scale studies giving cultural statistics. This is the first time in Lebanon, and it is something lacking a lot in almost all Arab Mediterranean countries. So we need this because we need to show that creativity can bring a lot in terms of job creation and wealth creation also. This is the first step in order to hope maybe to show the politician that creativity is or should be apart from any recovery plan, any economic recovery plan post-COVID, and also in order to recognize the importance of this cultural sector within the public finance. So mainstream culture within this public finance or within the economic plan. Unfortunately, knowing our region, I think that the opposite will happen, that the risk will be that we will see the cultural budget decreased, and the sector will be more and more relying on philanthropic crowdfunding, as we talked, and especially on EU funds.
Thank you very much. So more funding, and this is from the private and NGO, private sector NGO. Saneh, what do you think? What is your perception based on what we heard today?
I think more private-public partnerships, really, or multi-stakeholders partnerships, where you have institutions, international institutions, local institutions, national institutions, plus private funders or the private sector. I think we really should move towards that. We should move toward this type of alliances. No one will be able to do it on its own, so it should be really mainstreamed and pushed. Two other things. One thing, we should also increase the role and maybe give cultural operators more tools and skills for advocacy. They need to advocate properly towards either public authorities or even private funders, even crowdfunding. It has been explained, you have to do it today. And the last thing, we need more data and more research. We need more data and research. That's your work.
Yes.
You find a way.
That's very good. And I think this has been also confirmed by Jihen, the multi-stakeholder approach, and also the promotion. I mean, I always discuss with her about how to really enhance the advocacy. And also, this is an important aspect that you mentioned. I think, of course, the data, we rely on the public authorities to collect the data on certain sectors. But then in the absence of that, obviously, we will need to go into surveys, and this needs much larger resources than what we would expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mauricio, what do you see a role for this crowdfunding platforms to enhance financing for the sector in the Mediterranean? So I'm speaking about North Africa and Middle East.
It's creating those bridges in between different initiatives. You know, we have the digital structures that don't understand of that borders. So it's a perfect scenarios in which we could combine, we could work together in common frameworks in which data is relevant. If we're talking about that digital economy and sharing economy in which crowdfunding is, could give us a lot of information. Trends, could give us impacts, could give us citizens engagement or that public engagement, which is already pre-configured when you're launching a crowdfunding campaign. And what is most important is that you're building through that existing platforms, projects, initiatives, and that support a crowdvocacy, a mature taking decisions where those funds go within EU funds, within citizens engagement, within private or public funds, and those lines of action, which it catches the real temperature of what's going on bottom up. So I think it's a crucial part.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, last word from you.
Thank you very much. I have 3 very short points. The first is, for us as UFM Secretariat, we have it very clear. We will continue to assume our role as a platform of dialogue, bringing together all the actors and relevant stakeholders, trying to build consensus on sectoral agendas, and creative economy is one of these sectoral agendas. The other one is, apart from all the synergies and complementarities that we can create, I do believe that creative economy will be one of the keys for a post-pandemic recovery. This is my view. Creativity, by its very nature, is resilient. And actually, if we think about all the great crises suffered in this part of the world throughout history, it was only through creative solutions that we managed to pull out of such crises. Finally, I believe that creativity will be very important in as much as digitalization is concerned. In other words, the creative solutions that adopt the digital technologies of the fourth industrial revolution will stand a better chance to fare better in a post-pandemic horizon.
So should we expect a big conference next year on the creative sector?
Totally. There is the Creative Forum Ljubljana, the 3rd edition, and we might be also organizing something, hopefully in partnership with you and the other great partners here, on creative skills, on promoting creativity, on supporting creative entrepreneurship to the end of the very interesting list.
Okay, this is important to enhance the awareness on the different projects, and at the same time on the new research that we will be hopefully producing in the next months and probably years. So with this, I would like to thank very, very much the panelists for this really fascinating discussion. It is clear to me that we have a lot to do to better understand the intricacies of this sector, and also at the same time try to act, because again, we are a research organization. We normally think research, but also we are trying to take a part in the action together with our partners who are on the ground. And I think this is a great approach, multi-stakeholder approach that Sana and Jihen have emphasized on. And this is a new approach to ensure that we are really making an impact. So I'm very happy to have this discussion today. This is not going to be ending, so we will continue enhancing the discussions about this topic. I would like to thank very much the audience and whoever has joined us via Facebook. I would like you also to be aware that our next meeting or webinar would be on the 3rd of December. It will be dealing with the external dimension of the EU Green Deal. And then again, we will start at 3 p.m. Thank you very much all for your joining us.